The key to understanding the cultural developments of the interwar period is the heavy shadow that the First World War cast over Western civilization. As we've already covered, politics was rapidly changing by the destruction wrought by the First World War, and this is no less true in cultural areas and attitudes as well. Again, the losses of 20 to 21 million men, along with the 50 million at least lost in terms of the Spanish flu, is a devastation that would be hard to recover under in any situation. And we should be unsurprised that it leads to any number of developments socially as people attempt to try and cope and recover from this. One of the main developments, however, is a great deal of disillusionment with the world that had gone off to war. We've talked about this before, but again, the disillusionment that what was there to Western civilization that was worthwhile, worth saving, worth preserving? We've already discussed Wilfred Owen and his Dulce et Decorum Est war poem, but even after the war, veterans and others struggled to try and make sense of their experience. And indeed, one of the seminal works in Western literature was produced by a veteran who seemed to encapsulate the horrors fully and completely of the conflict. This is Eric Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front. This famous work, which is taken as sort of a seminal anti-war book, seems to best encapsulate the horror of the conflict, but also the futility of why it was being fought in the first place, the foolishness of the war, the sense that the men suffered and died for seemingly no purpose. That seems to be the crux of the element behind so much of the disillusionment in the post-war period. It wasn't simply that the sacrifices were awful, the conflict brutal. It was that it was really seemingly for no point. Indeed, as the interwar period continued, the sense of disillusionment just simply grew stronger, simply because as the world started to trend closer and closer to a new war, it became all the more apparent that the First World War and all its sacrifices did not produce a war to end all wars. Now, in beginning with this disillusionment, that's one strand of response to the losses and conflict of the First World War. The other strand seems, ironically, the polar opposite, the opposite of disillusionment, but I want to trace through what's going on there. As much of the losses led to disillusionment by some, it also caused others to rebel. Namely, rebel against traditional views, traditional beliefs, traditional mores. In many ways, what you should see is the devastation was so great, so awful, so incomprehensible that people simply rebelled and turned against much everything else that society represented. Indeed, why would you care for the morals of society if the society that had gone off to war had been so faulty? Why should you care about its attitudes towards sex, towards fashion, towards attitudes towards male and female relations? Why should you care about that anymore, since that world that had gone off to war was so horrible? And thus a contingent of society undertook a search for meaning in this interwar period, and they sought to find that meaning through sex, dancing, and music. The best example, of course, being the flappers of the 1920s. These were women who took up smoking, who flouted societal and sexual norms. They wore excessive makeup. They modeled their fashion after a sort of more boyish, rectangular look, flat-chested and square look, rather than the bustle and ornate corsets of Victorian wear. In nearly every way that they could try and challenge conventions, they did. And here you see an example of potentially a flapper as someone is measuring to see if the swimsuit they're wearing is too revealing for the beach, and if they should be charged and thrown into prison. And the flappers and their goals, their push towards flouting conventions and pushing the boundaries of society represents a strand of response to the First World War that is encapsulated in the Roaring Twenties. What you should see this as is the hedonistic search for meaning and pleasure is as much a response to the First World War as was those who are utterly disillusioned. There's a sense that if all of society is in ruin and all the rest of this, why shouldn't you just enjoy life and find meaning in it? And so what you see in the Roaring Twenties is an attitude of rebellion that trickles through all levels of culture. In music, you see that rebellion in terms of an openness to new musical styles, even musical styles that are largely coming out of minority areas of the world in terms of looking at jazz in America. But you also see that this is a time period of new openness to culture and forms of cultural production. This is an era in which radio comes into its own. This is a new technology allowing people to experience culture and new cultures in a way they never would have before, taking that culture literally into their homes. The other strand of cultural development was the development of cinema or movies. And in this, what you can see is the film starting to showcase the developments of new meccas of culture. If you will, the First World War upended the old system of culture. Culture had been located in the main capitals of Europe, Paris, London, these, especially Paris, Vienna. These are the old capitals. These are the old areas in which you would go and find and sort of genuflect and find true culture. Well, now through technology and changing attitudes, now you have new booming meccas of this new film medium. You have the Arena of Berlin, which if you ever take a film studies course, Weimar film culture is a seminal period in the development of the art of film. Famed works such as Metropolis are made during this time period. But also this is the time period in which Los Angeles starts to take off, and you start to see the development of, well, modern Hollywood. What you should see in all of this is this broadening push in cultural ways is a different response, but in many ways sort of the flip side of the coin to those who are disillusioned. I know looking at people who are celebrating, who are having parties and all the rest of this, think of Great Gatsby if you've ever read it, doesn't seem like people who are disillusioned or sad in any way. But what you should recognize is this is in many ways an outgrowth of that same sense of loss, that same sense of disillusionment, that same sense of destruction, and what they're looking for is purpose and meaning, and they're grasping at whatever sort of element of culture and society they can grab hold of that seems to give them that fleeting sense of pleasure and purpose. And so in looking at this, what you should see is the interwar period is largely a period in which culture and society is still attempting to cope, still attempting to recover from the giant losses, the horrible losses that were the First World War.